Now the time has come, so we would now like to begin the panel, Disaster Resilience and Utilization of Artificial Intelligence. First, we will introduce the panelists. From One Concern, we have the co-founder and CEO, Ahmed Wani. Mr. Wani will be participating remotely. Next, from Sompo Japan, we have the General Manager of Strategic Business Design Department, Mr. Akihiro Kimura. Finally, the moderator is Nikkei's Senior Staff Writer and Editorial Writer, Kiyoshi Ando. I'd like to request for your best regards. And we would now like to request Mr. Ando to take over as moderator. Please allow me to begin. Thank you very much for your participation. In this session, we are going to deal with the subject of disaster resilience and the relationship of artificial intelligence. We have the participation of General Manager Kimura from Sompo Japan, and we have One Concern's CEO, Ahmed Wani. As you know, Sompo Japan is a major non-life insurance company, and the coverage of their operations have broadened with various partners. They are working with digital technologies and big data, and is offering various types of safety, security, and health-related services. And as we are facing the new normal era, instead of offering financial compensation after damage has occurred, they are also working actively on prevention and mitigation of disasters. And so they are looking at services to enhance resilience. And today we have Mr. Kimura, who is in charge of using AI and technologies to create new services for disaster prevention and mitigation. Meanwhile, One Concern is a startup company based in Silicon Valley, USA. They are involved in disaster prevention. And today's speaker, the CEO and co-founder Ahmed Wani, was a person who was suffering damage caused by natural disasters, having been trapped for 7 days in India's Kashmir region after his home collapsed in the 2014 floods. And he realized the importance of mitigating damage caused by natural disasters. Because of that, as a structural engineering engineer, Ahmed Wani met with Nicole Hu, a machine learning engineer at Stanford University, where he was conducting research, and Timothy Frank, an earthquake scientist. And by sharing their areas of expertise, they founded One Concern in 2015 with the goal of developing systems that combines disaster science-based data science and machine learning technology to realize their vision of planetary scale resilience, where people are able to live in a safer, equitable, and sustainable world. One Concern's desire is to make disasters less deadly by using the latest AI and data-driven technology in disaster-prone Japan, coincided with Sompo Japan's desire to contribute to society by providing services that contribute to safety and security. And they have started to develop a disaster prevention and mitigation system that predicts damage from natural disasters. And they have been writing POC on flood and earthquake issues in Kumamoto City since 2019. We would like to begin the session, and we are dealing with the subject of disaster resilience and the utilization of artificial intelligence and big data. So we would like to be as specific as possible as we discuss about the various issues that we face. In regard to disaster prevention, what is the data that is necessary? That's difficult to understand, so we'd like to talk about what kind of data is necessary and what can be done So as an intro, we would like to ask Mr. Kimura and Mr. Wani to talk about this. First of all, Mr. Kimura, how do you do? My name is Kimura. I would like to request for your best regards. In our case, as introduced, starting from last year, we have started to use artificial intelligence for prevention and mitigation of disasters, and we have been starting our activities in developing systems. In that sense, we can say that we are a front runner in dealing with these kind of issues. And in regard to the question that was just raised, weather information, for example, there's the Bureau, and there are the private sector companies that are carrying out weather forecasts, and there are many types of different sensors. Individuals are also involved. And the major assumption here is that in the year 2000, over the period between the year 2000 to 2010 or 2020, we have seen an increase in the number of disasters. Natural disasters have caused economic damage, and they have also hit insurance companies, and their insurance payments from the insurance companies have increased steadily. We refer to this as the new normal, but in regard to weather conditions, the insurance companies will find that if we continue like this, we can only increase premiums, but systems are not going to be able to keep up with this. So we'd like to take advantage of technology to mitigate disasters. That's the way we were thinking about now. And so therefore, we have been working with Mr. Ahmad Wani's one concern. And in that sense, for data, there's various types of data that people have in regard to weather forecasts. There's also the geological data, or terrain data, or vegetation data, and there is also geographical data, and there's also urban data. There's superficial urban data, but there's also underground data, or infrastructure data, transportation, traffic data. There are many data sources that had not been integrated and analyzed up until now. But with the evolution in technology, it will be possible to integrate and to analyze and to forecast and to evaluate based on such data. So currently, that's what we are doing, gathering a large amount of data from the national government, the local governments, and from the corporations. As much as possible, we want to gather data, integrate it, and to use it for mitigation of disasters.
Now, Mr. Wani, I think the basic thinking is the same. What are the purposes and what data do you actually use? If you can answer these questions.
Thank you so much for having me, by the way, and welcome everyone. So there's essentially, if you look at the disaster management life cycle or the resilience life cycle, there's things which we can do before the event, sort of like 5 to 10 years before the event. There's things we can do right before the event as the typhoon is approaching or as the flood is happening. And there's things which we can do sort of after the earthquake or during the recovery process after a flood. And all these different phases require different sets of solutions which need to be built, and therefore different data sets which need to be captured in order to help make the decision. Now, as Mr. Kimura actually very eloquently explained, the crux is really to just be able to sort of understand both the built environment and the natural environment, sort of how the natural vegetation looks like, how the forests look like, how the trees look like, how the ocean looks like, and really how the built environment, sort of buildings, power, water, roads, bridges, water pipes, how do they look like? And then being able to sort of have as many sensing mechanisms to understand change in these processes. Whether it's satellite imagery, whether it's street view, whether it's social media, whether it's weather sensors, whether it's river gauge sensors, anything which is able to sort of help us understand change and predict forecast for the next 50 years or for the next 5 minutes. So it can be a whole host of data, and where AI is particularly helpful in being able to sort of take all of this unstructured data and be able to make forecasts which can help make better decisions. In fact, so if you could sort of, zoom out a little bit, you're kind of modeling people, places, and processes. And sort of, we have to understand the places. We have to also understand the people, right? Because as we see, senior and elderly people get affected much more than others. So we have to understand who is getting affected, because it's much of a human problem as it's an economic problem. And then, of course, we have to understand the processes, whether it's the dependencies, the supply chains, and the economic impacts of business interruption or the repair costs of critical infrastructure. So it's really collecting data associated with people, places, and processes. This data can be both static or it can be dynamic. It can be coming from social media, or it can be coming from a sensor. And the way we think about it is really, you need to be able to sort of create what we call as a digital twin of the physical earth. So the world is not 2D, right? So the world is multiple dimensions, and every building is a node. And we want to be able to capture the information of every building into that node, and every other building is another node. A tree can be a node, and they're connected through these edges or dependencies, whether it's roads, water pipes, power lines, and we are able to sort of capture all these different dependencies.
すみません、ちょっと画面が切れてしまいましたが、時間がもったいないので、
Sorry
その間
that
に次の
the
質問
screen is lost, but I'd like to ask this next question to Mr. Kimura. So as was just discussed, when we want to make use of data, data should always be available. In Japan, there are certain set of data that has not been used. Have we been able to utilize data that is available? Yes, we want to capture data for a certain specific purpose. In Japan, it could be owned by the national government, it could be municipal government, or it could be the companies. Interestingly, a lot of times we do not know exactly where the data lies, and it could be that data is so much distributed. It could be the same data owned by the municipal government, the same copy of the data is held by consulting company. And data formats are diverse. It could be paper, so there are multiple different information sources. So looking for data that could be useful is such a challenge. Once you discover the data that you want, data can be physically distributed. How can we extract that data? It depends on the regulation. We do not have effective regulation for us to be able to make a decision whether we are permitted to extract data. Once you get data, you need to process data. And then you might have to delete the data after a certain period of time. There may be limitation as to commercial use of data that is captured. So you collect the data from multiple sources. You can combine them together. But if there is one piece of data that is limited in terms of the usage, you may not be able to use all of the data that you collected. So collecting data, integrating them, use that for something else. We still have regulations that need to do a lot of catching up. On the other hand, we have different grains of data at different places. Because of, generally speaking, Japanese people are diligent, we have recorded data precisely, as the minister earlier said. They are all discrete data, but we should be able to make use of these data effectively, more effectively. So the disaster could happen anytime. Unless the disaster data is integrated, it cannot be shared with other neighboring countries. So international data sharing is important. What is your thought on this, Mr. Wani?
Can you still hear me?
聞こえませんでしたかね。
You couldn't
デ
hear
ータを
me.
統合的に使うと
The
いうことが
use
非常
of
に大切なんで
integrated
すけども、
data
一
is
国の中に
important.
とどまる話ではなくて、おそらく国
It's
際
not
的な
just
データシェア
limited
リン
to
グをする
within
こ
a
とによっ
country.
てレジリエン
The
スの一層高める
international
ことがで
data
きると思
sharing
うんです
could
が、こ
enhance
れに向けて
resilience.
のアイデアなり考
So
え
towards
がありました
this,
ら、
do you have any ideas or any thought on this?
So thank you for that. So I think that, as Kimura-san explained, a big part of this is to be able to capture as much data as we can. But it's really important to be able to sort of make sure that we understand that there are a lot of data gaps. What I mean by that is, for example, I was in the previous question, I was referring to digital twin. I was referring to every water pipe and every power line and every road network. Those data sets don't even exist, right? Most cities don't know where their water pipes are. They were put in before this digital revolution even took place. And AI can really help in filling those gaps. But fundamentally, we do need a basic amount of data to be able to make those projections or to be able to make those predictions. So AI can definitely help fill the gaps in a much more smarter way, but we need to be able to get more clearer data sharing agreements. What we've seen is with GDPR in Europe or even in the United States, there's much more clarity in terms of what is personally identifiable information, what can be collected, and what cannot be collected. And it would go a long way if we are able to do that, have that clarity in terms of data sharing policy in Japan. Because disasters affect everyone, whether it's utilities, whether it's governments, private companies, or consumers. And so I feel like everybody needs to come in and pitch in, to create a social resilience.
まさにその縦割り打破あるいはオープ
Indeed,
ン
we
データ
have
の
to
活用
escape from a
国際的な
hierarchical
シェアリ
structure
ング
and take
そういったこと
advantage of
は
open data or
でき
have
ると思います
international sharing.
デジタル庁とかですね
And
行
so,
政
if we
と
have a
か地域
digital
研究担当部長代
agency
に
and
しっかり取り組んでもらいたい
if we
と思いま
have
す
various types of
ワニさんは
administrative
まあ
reforms
AI
carried out,
とい
perhaps
う
this
こ
can be
と
done.
AI を活用
Now,
して
Mr. Wani, you're taking
国際
advantage
そ
of
のレジリエ
artificial
ンスレジリエン
intelligence
スを
to
高めていくということをおっしゃ
offer
っていましたけど
services to
実際の
enhance
AI 自体
disaster
の対応と
resilience.
か
But in
これ
regard
ま
to
での
what
レジリエ
AI
ンス
can
の対応も
accomplish
少し
and what
詳
is
しく教えて
different
ください
from the past, could you touch upon those points?
Absolutely. I was very, very blessed and lucky to meet Professor Andrew Ng and do research with him at Stanford. And as you know, he has been a pioneer in this field. One of the concepts which I feel is particularly relevant to this is what we call as transfer learning, wherein you are now able to create memory-based algorithms so that you are able to learn from one environment and take that learning into a different environment. Now, why that's particularly important is, every disaster is almost like a fingerprint. It's very unique. That's why every time a disaster happens, it's almost like a surprise. You've never almost seen that because they're so rare, these large catastrophes. And so it's really critical to be able to sort of capture the learnings from all these different disasters into a new event. Now, if you take the example of San Francisco, for example, it has never had an earthquake more than 7 magnitude since the last 100 years. But the probability of that happening in the next 30 years is really high. So how do we now capture and predict sort of the impact of a 7 magnitude when we never trained our algorithms to do that? So with advanced AI technologies like transfer learning, for example, and other probability-based systems, we are now able to carry forward learnings not just from San Francisco, but from disasters in multiple countries, because 7 magnitudes have happened in Japan, they have happened in New Zealand, in Indonesia, in Mexico. And we are able to bring those learnings into San Francisco. And once we localize the model for San Francisco, it has that memory. And that's really powerful to be able to take those best practices and apply that using big data. And self-driving cars do the same thing, that they are learning on the fly and combining those learnings in the network. There's this intrinsic network effect when when you take disasters into account, because as I was mentioning, there's a ripple effect. If there's a power plant which is affected, or if there is a hospital, or a power outage, a hospital could go down, and that could affect healthcare for people. So there's almost value in creating an ecosystem of global players who are able to sort of share data and learnings with all of us. So that's why I feel like this has to be much of an international movement.
Mr. Kimura, when it comes to the positive points about AI and the services in Japan, do you believe that this is important? Thank you. Well, in the case of Japan, they often say that Japan is like a department store for disasters, because all kinds of disasters exist in Japan. And with the supervised data gained from AI, and if we are able to foster this, and during the process of fostering by data exchange with the rest of the world, it will be possible to have AI learn more, in which case we would be able to expect a wonderful AI to emerge, because in Japan we have so many disasters. And if we take advantage of artificial intelligence to be able to predict natural disasters, would mitigate economic damage, save human lives, and we can expect very positive effects generated. In that sense, for disaster mitigation, I believe that we are in a good environment to foster the right AI for that purpose. Now, people may be intimidated by AI. They might think that they're going to get a supercar in their hands and would not be able to understand how to use it, or maybe intimidated to use it. There are quite a few places where there is that atmosphere, but if we solidly foster this, I think that this can be of benefit for the entire world. We can get a benevolent AI, which will be quite good for Japan. In terms of risk evaluation or so on, more casual use of AI should be pursued, is perhaps your position. We've talked about disaster resilience, we've talked about earthquakes and so on, but throughout the world, we have the COVID-19 pandemic. But in the post-COVID-19 world, how are we going to rebuild the economy and society is going to be an important question. And there are many things that are common to the countermeasures against disasters. So in the post-COVID-19 world, for AI and for disaster forecasting systems and the use of this technology for this, Mr. Wanyu, what are your thoughts?
I think you're spot on. There is definite linkages between COVID and our, fighting earthquakes and floods. But it's important to also understand that we need to be forward-looking and we need to be data-driven. So, as I described, there is a lot of value in being able to quantify non-financial risks, whether it's emanating from, earthquakes, floods, or pandemics like COVID-19 or COVID-2021 for that matter. So we need to be able to sort of create like ratings, like the Moody's ratings, to be able to sort of measure these risks better. And then we need to be able to sort of create systems so that we can sell better services and help people mitigate these. But a very important thing is we need to be able to sort of prioritize. There's almost 3 steps to the COVID thing. The first thing is, many things have changed, post COVID-19. For example, we were trying to expand the San Francisco airport, which might no longer be an urgent priority. More than highways, the society requires broadband, right? Because people are increasingly now working from home. So cities, governments, and really private corporations need to rethink how they prioritize investments. And infrastructure investments need to be forward-looking in terms of what the future paradigms post-COVID-19 are. The second aspect of this is climate, because we don't want to rebuild in the same locations which have been flooded 3 times over the last 5 years. So we want to take into account future risks. It's like almost like you're driving at 100 miles an hour. You don't want to be looking in the rear view mirror. You want to be looking in the front view mirror. You want to be looking at the future risks. And those are getting exacerbated with the new normal. So you want to take those risks into account when you're making investments. And the final thing, which is pretty critical, is resilience, what we call as resilience divide. Each society has inequities, and different people get affected differently. In the US, we've seen how different communities, like the Black community and the low-income communities, have been affected by COVID much more. We have seen that in disasters as well, like Hurricane Harvey and Katrina. And COVID has definitely exposed that, where elderly people are getting affected much more than others. So we need to come up with a holistic investment strategy for our infrastructure deployments, all the way from what is the post-COVID priorities, what are the climate priorities, and then finally, how do we make sure that these investments do not widen the resilience divide or the social inequities, but help bridge those inequities?
Kimura-san、日本においてはどうでしょうか。
Mr.
同じような
Kimura?
アプローチがあると思いますが。
I think we have similar approaches here in Japan. What is your view on this? We had 10th typhoon approaching Japan. We know that the size of disaster is being intensified and it affects the wider area. And therefore, the information is communicated widely. If AI can localize a specific area indicating people who need to be evacuated or limit their activities, if we can actually pinpoint the area, we will be able to allocate resources more effectively. So it will be more efficient and in terms of limiting the people's activities to keep them safe. It's not just evacuation, it is related to activities of businesses and also the financing or investment. So when AI is applied, of course we focus on natural disasters. When it's used effectively, we will be able to dedicate the necessary resources on the needed area in a very short period of time. So in that sense, it is very effective. So we, the finance institutions, will be able to develop products and services that are most suitable to that area. So I have great expectation. Thank you very much. We do not have much time remaining, but lastly, since you have the joint project in Kumamoto, I'd like you to explain the Kumamoto project. What have you been able to achieve in this project, Mr. Kimura? I said it's been difficult to collect data, but the city of Kumamoto is very innovative, providing data. They are very cooperative. And one concern, technology and knowledge combined together, we are able to predict the occurrence of a flood in Kumamoto. So prediction going forward is very important. The city of Kumamoto, citizens and businesses will be able to receive this predictive data to mitigate the impact of disaster effectively. So I am very thankful to the city of Kumamoto. Mr. Ahmad, we only have 10 seconds, but if you want to add something, please.
No, I'm really impressed by the leadership which the Japanese community and the Japanese government, the private sector is showing in terms of being the front runner for resiliency. And I feel like you said that Japan is the experiment bed for natural disasters. I feel like Japan can definitely now lead the way in terms of applying AI for natural disasters. So we are thankful for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'm pretty sure that you wanted to share more, but our time runs out. We want to conclude this session. Mr. Ani, Mr. Kimura, and Mr. Ando, thank you very much.